reckon we'll get started. Is that all right? Back to the recording. Okay, I think we're streaming. Yes. Hi, everyone. So I am Janine Harris, and I'll tell you more about myself in a sec. Luke, if you can. And so, yeah, Luke is the PowerPoint control in the corner there. So we're doing an information session at the request of the Flinders University Social Work Students Association. Lucas, I don't know if you'd like to introduce yourself and say a little bit more about that.
Sure. Hello, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for attending today. It's good to have a great turnout. My name's Lucas. I'm the current president of the Flinders University Social Work Association, commonly referred to as FUSWA. We are very thankful for the staff and everyone involved with placement to be able to put this together. It's part of an area that we're very passionate about for students and providing students information around placement so we can clear any concerns, questions, etc. From that, I'll hand it over to Janine. And the FUSWA, we're always available to all students, and please feel free to log on to our website, www.fuswa.com, to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucas. Okay, so next one, please, Luke. So I would like to acknowledge, of course, that we meet on the lands of the Kaurna people, the beautiful lands of the Kaurna people, and finally we're starting to look like we're heading into spring. I know many of you, but some of you I don't know, as a person who's come from another country to Australia, I feel that's particularly important for me personally to acknowledge that we meet on lands that have not been ceded by the local people who owned this land for thousands of years, and I just want to pay our respect to their elders past, present and emerging. So we're going to split this into two sessions. So there's going to be the academic overview, which is by the academic field education team, who I'll tell you more about in a moment. And then we're going to have the college work-integrated learning support team doing the second half with you. So that's the formal part where we're doing the presentations. But feel free at any point to ask questions. You're very welcome to ask questions. Nalini over here is also going to be going around with notes for you to write questions down, and you can pass those questions to us so that we can make sure that we answer them at some point in the session. So what we're going to be doing in general is starting with professional accreditation requirements, placement assessment requirements. So this is from an academic point of view, practicalities and preparation for placement interviews. And then our lovely colleagues from the Work-Integrated Learning Support team will be talking more with you about the pre-placement requirements and processes and the placement matching process and notifications and other practicalities that they would like to discuss with you. And then there's an informal Q&A session where we'll just mingle, and you're welcome to approach anyone who seems to be the person who might have an answer to your question, and we'll be here till 4 o'clock for anyone who would like to stay and ask any questions. Thanks, Luke. So, starting with our Work-Integrated Learning Support team, the college team, we have Hayley Scott, who's the team leader, who's actually not here at the moment, and then Luke Robbins over here, and Kim Lawrence over there, fellow South African. And they are the people at the other end of the social work placement's email address. And I have to tell you, because I know from the work that we do with the WIL support team, they get about 200 emails a day, don't you? So they're absolutely drowning in email queries. So be kind when you're communicating with them, because it's a pretty stressful space when there are particular periods of the semester where they really are inundated with emails. Then Nalini Klopp over here is the manager, the overall manager for Work-Integrated Learning. Would you like to say anything else, Nalini, about yourself? Do you want a microphone? Yes. And come and stand
just so that for recording purposes. So I'm Nalini, I manage work-integrated learning support across the whole of the university. So I'm here looking at helping make this process smoother, I suppose, but always available if you've got concerns or comments that you'd like to raise further. But broadly, Hayley is the person who you would normally see. I'm kind of stepping in for her today and also just helping streamline this. And you'll hear from me at the end. I'm going to take you for a stroll through the flow site that I've created and make sure that that makes sense and works for you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Then, thanks, Luke. I feel like you're reading in my mind. So in the field education academic team, we have, first of all, the topic coordinators for the field education topics. So in the first placement bachelor's topic, Luke Roberts is the topic coordinator. He actually organised the venue today, but he's sick, so he sends his apologies. Then the final placement Bachelor of Social Work topic, Rebecca Stars is the topic coordinator. Do you want to come and introduce yourself a bit more, Rebecca?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, so my name's Rebecca. How many of you are in the BSW, or is this predominantly Masters? BSW? Yep, 3. Yep, I know Lucas is, yeah. Good to see you all. So I'm the Bachelor of Social Work course coordinator, but I'm also the TC for the final placement topic, which is not a topic that you'll probably be in until closer towards the end, year 4. So Luke Roberts, who Janine's identified, that will be your first placement, and then the one that I'm TCing for is going to be sort of the final topic that you complete in the whole degree.
Thanks, Rebecca. You might, in fact, have contact with Rebecca sooner because Luke will be on paternity leave for part of first semester, and Rebecca has kindly agreed to be backfilled for him while he's on paternity leave. Then in the Master of Social Work, the first placements, I'm usually the first placement topic coordinator, but I've had a workload readjustment. My lovely manager is trying to help me to find a life outside Flinders. So my lovely colleague Louise Butler, who's coming in a little while, she's going to be the first placement topic coordinator. She has coordinated field topics before. She's very experienced in this area, as are all the topic coordinators. And then the final placement Master of Social Work topic, the coordinator is Kirsty Lowe. She's also sent her apology. She's off sick today, and she has sick children. And then my role is the academic coordinator in field education. So that's oversight of the field education program from an academic point of view. So I don't have anything to do with pre-placement compliance or in place or matching people to placements or any of that stuff. Our role in the academic space is mainly once you're already on placement, although we do certainly work closely with the Work-Integrated Learning Support team. And then other academic staff in field education include other teaching specialists. So we're all teaching specialists, the topic coordinators. We have field education liaisons, who are casual academic staff members. So each of you, when you're on placement, will get a field education liaison person who will work with you and be responsible for your assessment through the course of your placement. And for those of you who don't have an on-site social worker on placement to supervise you, you will have an external field educator. Thank you. So starting with what is field education. So for those of you who have already, I see a few faces here who would already know the answer to this. But for those of you who don't, you haven't done a placement yet, it is a core component of Australian social work programs. And we also have to comply with national standards for field education in social work in order for us to be internationally recognised. So one of the issues that we hear about every year is how come we have to do 1,000 hours of placement. That's because it's an international standard, and Australia would lose its international accreditation if we reduce the length of your placements to less than 1,000 hours. But we certainly do recognise that 1,000 hours of placement is an incredibly onerous task for students who are juggling life, work, family, as well as very heavy study load. So it is really stressful having to balance 2 500-hour placements alongside all the other things that you have to do. So field education is also learning in a workplace environment, in a human services practice setting. The purpose of field education is to develop effective and reflective practitioners by helping you to integrate knowledge and skills in practice, developing competence and confidence, hopefully, developing your understanding of issues related to values and ethics in the real-world human services environment, and supporting the formation of a professional identity, understanding who you are as a social worker and how you apply that knowledge and practice base to the way that you work as a social worker. So field education is essentially a combination of transferring your knowledge from the classroom to placement, plus developing your skills for practice, developing your professional social work identity so that you understand who you are in comparison with other human service professions, and then putting that all together as an essential learning process in practice in an actual human services context. Any questions so far? All good? Okay. So the Australian Social Work Education and Accreditation requirements, these are set by the Australian Association of Social Workers, the AASW, and they were updated in November 2021. I know there has been some confusion recently, for example, for students who had placement arrangements approved before November 2021 under the old ASWERS, and now the new ASWERS is slightly different. So just bear in mind that if you've engaged in a placement process prior to November last year, the requirements may be slightly different now to what they were then. So for example, in relation to work-based placements, which I'll tell you more about in a moment. And please feel free at any point, there's no such thing as a stupid question in this arena. If I use words that are unfamiliar to any of you, please feel free to stop and ask. We're very happy to answer questions. So the main ASWERS requirements for field placement, as they stand at the moment, as of November 2021, are that you have to complete 1,000 hours of professional practice learning involving no more than 3 placements. So we actually do 2 placements of 500 hours each. The reason the ASW says that is if someone has a placement termination for whatever reason, the max they can't do, like have a placement termination and then have like another 100 hours somewhere and then do another 50 hours somewhere else and then another 200 hours somewhere else. If they have a placement termination, no placement can be shorter than 250 hours, and the maximum number of placements is 3. So under normal circumstances, and this is going to apply to almost everyone, you'll be doing 2 500-hour placements. Your placements have to involve diverse learning experiences. We do sometimes hear from students who have a fabulous first placement and they love it and they want to stay there. They don't want to do a second placement in a different setting. Unfortunately, that's not possible. You do have to do your final placement in a different context to where you did your first placement. No placement is less than 250 hours, so again that applies only to situations where you've had a placement termination for whatever reason. 500 hours of placement must be undertaken in a direct practice role involving the application of professional interpersonal skills. And I'll talk more about that in a moment because there's a lot of confusion about what direct practice means. You complete at least 1 placement with an on-site social work field educator. So there are many placements that don't have a social worker on site who can provide the supervision, either because there is a social worker there and they're too busy to do the supervision, or because it's a human services setting that is appropriate for a social work student, but they don't have a qualified social worker who can do the supervision. And in that case, an external field educator appointed by Flinders does your professional social work supervision. You have to have active involvement in social work roles, not only observation. But one of the messages that I really want you to take home with you, including to those of you who are watching and will be watching the recording, is don't panic. If you don't do anything meaningful, even in the first half of your placement, that's okay. I mean, in terms of direct practice, it's normal for the first few weeks of placement to be doing observation, doing a lot of reading, induction activities, getting to understand the agency before you really get immersed in direct practice. And in some cases, you're not going to be doing direct practice. It depends on the nature of the placement. So it's important to understand that social work placements are really diverse. We have responsibility for making sure that where you go on placement is able to give you learning opportunities that meet these ASW requirements. If you have a situation where you're concerned that the learning opportunities you have are not meeting the requirements, you would speak with your field education liaison person. But in the vast majority of cases, that's something we can easily manage and sort out to make sure that you're getting adequate learning opportunities. Okay, so clarifying, what do we mean by direct practice? So this is from the ASW. So again, don't worry if you hear people telling you that direct practice means you have to do counselling. It doesn't mean that at all. Direct practice is interventions with and on behalf of individuals, families, groups, and communities aimed at achieving the most effective outcomes for their health and well-being. So the focus is on the application of your interpersonal skills, your the skills that you've been learning in your prerequisite topics, both in the bachelor's and the master's. I don't know as much about the bachelor's. In the master's program, the faces I see here, I know are doing Chris Reynolds' topic, or have done Chris Reynolds' topic. That's your preparation for practice, where you're developing those interpersonal skills that you're then going to apply in your field placement context. So direct practice can include group work, can include community development, because you're still having direct contact with service participants. Can be advocacy, it can even be project work with service users. So project work isn't indirect practice unless you're not having contact with human beings as part of the placement. So it doesn't have to include case management, work with individuals, or counselling. So again, we don't want you to worry if you have a placement where you don't have this one-on-one work with individuals, because that's absolutely fine. You don't have to have it. It's not a requirement. Any questions about any of that so far? Akash, let me bring you the microphone. Just so that the students are listening.
Hello, yes. So my question was, if we are not going to be doing counseling or case management, so what are the different kind of work that we may be involved in? Yeah, if you could just answer that.
So it can be a combination of group work, project work, research, advocacy, can be case management. That can be one of the areas that you focus on in your placement. Rebecca, what am I missing? Other areas of practice besides counselling and case management?
Direct practice?
Yeah.
So it might be community development. Direct practice can be a whole range of things. I think it's good Janine's highlighted about the counselling. I don't know how many semesters I've heard students say to me, am I going to be doing therapy in this setting, even though they might be, for example, in a community centre. So if you're in a setting like a community centre where there might be like sort of drop-in sessions, there may be counselling, there may also be group work that's run. So it might be group facilitation, for example, in those kind of community settings. Some of those may be cultural specific. They also might have specific criteria around like babies, parents, and certain age groups. Also in the aged care area, there would be direct practice involving, I guess, group work where you're working with elderly people. I've had a number of students in those settings. So we've got a whole range of aged care organisations where students go in, they are working with projects, basically on a project, for example, with maybe 2 other peer students in the same setting, and they'll actually run different sort of lifestyle programs and recreational programs with aged care residents who are residing in the homes, and try and engage them in sensory activities, a whole range of different things around memory recall. I won't go into all the specifics, but it's quite broad. If you're going into an area like child protection, which is a strong background that I have, there are conditions, and Janine's kind of highlighted some settings are a bit different. There are conditions around a lot more observation, particularly in your first placement in that kind of setting for obvious reasons, because it has a statutory element to it. Records can be subpoenaed into court and they need to be cautionary around how much involvement a more inexperienced first placement student would have in that kind of environment. There's a couple of examples. There's probably more, but I'll hand you back.
Thank you. So, for example, if you were at a community centre, you might be doing activities with people who come into the community centre. So I'm thinking of Baptist Care SA, for example, which has a community centre called West Care in the city, and many of our students go on placement there. So service users come in to the service for things like emergency food, homelessness services, that sort of thing. So it's not where you're sitting down in an office having an interview with a client, but you're interacting with the service participants informally as they come into the centre, and they get engaged in these programs that are provided by the service. So you, in that sort of situation, it's important that you think about what you're doing as a social work student that's different from how a volunteer in a community centre might work with the service users, or how a youth worker or a community worker might work with them. So whatever the activity is you're applying your social work lens to working with those people. Make sense? Okay. Okay.
So you mentioned that these are the sort of activities that we would potentially be involved in. So I wanted to understand, like, what would be the expectation from the organizations or the places that we are going to in terms of our knowledge or in terms of our understanding about social work so far, because it's the first placement. Yeah. So this is another question, if you could just touch upon.
I'll just go back to the mic. So that's a really good question. What are the expectations, especially for those of you going on your first placement? It does depend on the agency. There are some agencies that have very high expectations, and we as field education academic staff try to work with the agency to just calm it down a bit in terms of expectations, because you can't be expected to do more than what the learning outcomes are that you're expected to achieve by the end of your first placement. But that's a process that's navigated with your field education liaison person, and it's part of, there's an early placement visit that happens with your field education liaison person, then there's a mid-placement assessment and an end-of-placement assessment. So it's kind of scaffolded, and you get different opportunities along the way to start from, where you're not expected to do unreasonable levels of work. And then, as you gain confidence, you get involved in more activities. So it does differ depending on where exactly you are. Okay, so let's talk about placement supervision requirements. So this is still staying with the ASWES requirements. So all students on placement receive supervision from a social work field educator who has a minimum of 2 years, full-time equivalent post-qualifying direct practice experience. Social work field educators can be on-site or external, like I mentioned earlier. If you have an external field educator, you'll also have an agency supervisor. So in the example that Rebecca gave in residential aged care, your on-site supervisor would usually be a well-being consultant or a lifestyle coordinator, and then you have an external social work supervisor, and the two of them work together to support you in your learning activities. You have to have a minimum of 1.5 hours of social work supervision per 35 hours of placement. So that's a total of 21.5 hours across your 500-hour placement. So if at any stage you're concerned that you're not getting enough supervision, that's something to tell us about. We really want to know about any concerns or difficulties you have on placement, because the sooner we know, the sooner we can get in there and try and resolve them. And in the vast majority of cases, issues like that are resolvable. You can have some of your social work supervision in groups with other students, but you have to have a minimum of 50% one-on-one supervision. And the extent to which you have group supervision depends on where you're placed. So some agencies kind of lend themselves more easily to group supervision than others. Thanks, Kim. Recognition of prior learning. So this is not relevant to a lot of you, but I just want to mention it for the benefit of those for whom it might be relevant, to check whether you might be eligible for recognition of prior learning, or RPL, which is if you've got a lot of human services experience in whatever organisations, and you meet the ASW's eligibility requirements, you can apply for RPL and then you get credit for your first placement. You can't get credit for your final placement, only your first. And the eligibility criteria are from the ASWES. First of all, currency. So you must have worked in a health or welfare setting for a minimum of 3 years full-time equivalent. And the final year must be within the last 3 years of the date of application. And then relevance is about what kind of work you've done in those human services roles. And it's got to be similar to the tasks carried out by a social worker, including direct practice. I'm not going to go through all of those. So those are just possible areas of practice that might be relevant for RPL. RPL applications happen in 2 stages. This is the first stage. You just fill in a couple of documents, submit them, and we tell you whether or not we think you're eligible. If we think you're eligible, we invite you to apply for stage 2, which is a much more detailed application where you have to write a whole big essay about yourself and you have to get a reference from a qualified social worker, at least one qualified social worker, who can attest to what you've said in your application. If you do think you might be eligible, you apply through Ask Flinders, and then they forward the applications to us. You can apply for RPL at any time, but if you're thinking that you might be eligible and you need to look at RPL or do your first placement in first semester next year, you'd have to apply pretty much right now, because it's they're due by the end of week 5 of the semester before you go on placement. And the stage 2 applications are due by the end of the 10th week of the semester before you're due to go on placement. The applications are assessed by field education academic staff, and if you do get approved for RPL, your final placement has to have an on-site qualified social worker in order to meet the ASW requirements. Thanks, Kim. Just wanted to talk briefly about access plans. If you have a medical condition, disability or mental health condition, you may very well be eligible for an access plan. You probably know about this already from your other topics. You can apply through the counselling service for an access plan. They do an assessment with you. An access plan can include adjustments that are relevant to field placement. And if you think that you might need adjustments for your placement, then we would encourage you to organise an access plan and forward it to the topic coordinator. And you can have a confidential discussion with the topic coordinator about what your access needs are on placement. So it might be that you need to attend placement fewer days per week, or it might mean that you need adjustments because you have a vision impairment or a hearing impairment, or you need accessibility because you use a wheelchair. So it's a range of those sorts of adjustments that we would look at. Yes, with the microphone.
Thanks, Lucas. I just want to say in relation to access plans, it's not uncommon for the Disability Service to not put a disclaimer point in there about needing adjustments for placements.
Yeah.
So that's something for us as topic coordinators that we really rely on you as the individual students with your access plan to contact the relevant TC about it. Because otherwise what can happen is if you don't do that and an agency is not aware, or the WIL team set up a pre-placement interview and you're going out there and an agency is not aware of certain conditions or limitations and restrictions they need to adjust, it can set up a bit of an issue so that when you start placement, you know, you might be 50 or 100 hours in and then start raising concerns about something on placement, and the agency will come back to us and say, we didn't know about that.
Yeah.
So this is just a really good way to have a transparent, upfront conversation. You just reveal what you feel you need to, with obviously your own confidentiality maintained, but what is appropriate for the placement setting. So you wouldn't have to have a whole holistic view, and I've said this to students before, you know, I have a long history of mental health issues, it's gone on for 14 years, that kind of thing. You just need to be really clear about if there is a mental health concern, this is one example, where you feel that it might be important for a particular reason on placement for an agency to know something about that. If you think, no, I have it in hand, I'm seeing my GP, I have a mental health plan in place, I have a psychiatrist or psychologist, I'm medicated and everything's under control, you might just have an access plan as a backup in a topic in case something happens with your mental health, which some students do. But this is really, I just want to really stress this because this has come up quite a bit, where students haven't said things and placements have come back to us asking, you know, what's going on. And it can become, as I'm sure you can appreciate, a rather uncomfortable conversation, because when it comes to access plans, they are confidential, they're private, and people can be sensitive about the issues in them. So really appreciate your honesty around that. Thanks.
Thanks, Rebecca. So yeah, you're under no obligation to disclose why you have an access plan, and you don't even have to disclose that you have an access plan if you don't think it's relevant to placement. But if you think it might be relevant to placement, what we need to know and what needs to be communicated to the agency is what adjustment needs you have, not what your condition is that's led to the access plan, but what the adjustment needs are. And sometimes it's kind of obvious and you don't really have an option but for the agency to know. So if you have a hearing impairment, obviously they're going to know why you have an access plan. But in some cases, the agency and us wouldn't know the details of why you have an access plan, because that's your right to confidentiality. Okay, Kim. So where are students placed? They occur in all kinds of settings, starting from a geographic point of view in metropolitan Adelaide and outlying areas, so that includes like Victor Harbour, Gawler, Murray Bridge, rural and remote South Australia, which we'll talk about more in a moment, interstate, so states other than South Australia. And I'm saying this kind of in obvious ways, bearing in mind for those of you who are listening that for people who are brand new to Adelaide, you know, you don't know what rural and remote means until you've driven around South Australia. You don't know what interstate means until you've possibly been interstate. So we need to be really clear about what those things mean, so that when you're filling in forms, you're ticking the right things. So like if you see a form that says rural or remote and you don't know what it means, don't just tick it. Rather just make sure that you're clear on what it is that's being asked in that in those forms that the Wheel support team deals with. Work-based placements can happen if you're currently working in a human services organisation that may have a role that meets the ASW requirements for a social work placement. You can apply to do work-based placement. We have to make sure that the placement fulfills the ASW requirements in the current ASWEAs, and they've actually become stricter in the revised ASWEAs than they were before. So there's quite a process we have to follow in order to make sure that a work-based placement meets those requirements. Field placements are hosted by a very, very broad range of agencies in different settings, so government and non-government agencies. Some organisations will only host final placement students, so that's important for you to be aware of. Like if you've got your heart set on a correctional services placement and you give Kim and Luke a hard time because they haven't matched you to one in correctional services, that's not because they don't want to try and accommodate your interests, is because no correctional services placement will take a first placement student. That's just the reality of some of the placements. Some of them will only consider final placement students. So that includes most mental health services, most child protection services, correctional services, hospitals, by and large, will only consider final placement students. Placement settings can be enormously varied, from schools to community centres to residential aged care to emergency services, domestic violence programs, multicultural services, working with refugees, disability, the whole range. It's we could go on for days talking about the range of possible placements. We do also have formal partnerships with a number of different agencies where they give us a minimum number of placements every semester. So, for example, SA Health, I think gives us about 40 placements a semester at the moment, right? Yeah. And DCP, Department for Child Protection, it's probably about 25 per semester, yeah. So all of these agencies we have a partnership with. So if you go on placement in one of these agencies, you'll be with a whole bunch of other students. In some cases, you would be with one other student, depending on where you are. And then there are agencies that can only manage one student at a time. So, or you might be by yourself. Okay, so getting back to interstate rural remote and work-based placements. So again, when we're talking about interstate placements, we're talking about everywhere except South Australia. When we're talking about rural and remote placements, we're talking about within the South, where there can be rural remote placements in any state, but in the South Australian state, it's places that are sort of 90 kilometres or more outside of Adelaide, so places like Whyalla, Port Pirie, Ngambia, we've got Port Augusta, got a whole... Oh yes, yes, I've got quite a few in Berry at the moment, yeah. So that's what it means, rural remote, that we're talking about an area outside of Adelaide. And then a work-based placement I've already mentioned, that's in your current workplace in a human services agency. Placement timelines for first semester next year. So most of you will start placement in mid to late February, depending on where you placed. The earliest possible start date is the 30th of January. You can't start earlier than that, partly because the topic flow sites only open on the 30th of January, and you can't be in a topic until the topic's open. The start date may vary depending on where you placed. So, for example, DCP and SA Health have extensive induction programs, and the start date of placement is organised around the induction program at those agencies. Estimated placement completion timelines if you don't take any leave. So this is really, really, really important if you haven't been on placement yet, to understand how long 500 hours is. So if you're doing 4 days a week, it'll take you from February to mid to late June. So it's longer than a semester. It's 17 to 18 weeks. If you're doing 3 days a week, it'll take you to late July, early August next year. That's 22 weeks. And if you're doing 2 days per week, which could only be approved if you do have an access plan, that's 9 months, 33 weeks. So it would take you to early October. So it's like a pregnancy. If you're doing a 2-day-a-week placement, it's a long time. And be aware that it does go into your study plan for second semester, and you need to take that into account in terms of your availability, what else you might be juggling in second semester, and so on. Any questions about any of that?
About the rural places,
Yeah.
because I know there's a form for that we have to fill and pick,
Yeah.
so which places we can go to.
Yeah.
If I don't get the chance, like let's say Victor Harbor, that's a Kangaroo Island, and Port Augusta, I selected those.
Yeah.
And is that guaranteed that I will get those, or if what happens if I don't? Will I be replaced to Metropolitan?
Do you want to answer that, Luke?
So if you nominate specific areas for your rural placement, we'll obviously do our best to try and make sure that we stick within that. If there comes a point where we know you're really keen to go rurally and support our allied health system rurally, then we'll try and do our best to get something that works. If, for example, there were none available where you wanted, we would check with you if you still wanted to do it and maybe offer a couple of other potential possibilities. And if you didn't want to do that, it's completely fine. You're not bounded by submitting the rural form. Obviously, if you said you want to do it and we find your placement, we'd love if you can still do it. But yeah, if you don't want to go to, for example, Mount Gambier, you don't have to. Don't worry about that. It's all good.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Luke. And we really do encourage you to consider a rural remote placement if it's possible for you. It's not possible for everyone. Partly because they're really good job opportunities for social workers in some of the rural and remote areas. And we've got lovely little communities developing of Flinders graduates in some of these places, like Whyalla. There's a lovely community of Flinders graduates who now live in Whyalla. Kesha.
Yeah. So you said for the, like, if any of us selects the 2 days per week option, it'll go for 9 months.
Yeah.
So I'm just concerned, like for the student visa, we are supposed to be enrolled full time.
Yeah.
So it probably bleeds out to the next semester.
Does, yes.
And how does that affect? And is that something that can be considered? Or
Yeah, that's a really good question. So if you are an international student on a study visa, you would need to liaise with the International Student Service, the visa compliance area. So even if you're doing placement 2 days a week, it still counts as full-time. But it does run into your next semester, which means that you need to work out whether you can manage starting 4 topics the following semester while you're still finishing off your placement. Yeah. Anything else? Okay, I'll keep going. Where was I? What was I? Okay. Placement attendance and duration. So Flinders students are expected to undertake placement 4 days per week, and it's usually 7 to 7.5 hours per day at most agencies. And that takes about 17 to 18 weeks if you're doing it 4 days per week. It could be longer if there are lots of public holidays. So first semester takes longer because there's so many public holidays, where second semester doesn't take quite as long. But then also if you take sick leave, because sick leave doesn't count towards your placement hours, you can only count active placement time towards your placement hours. Like I've said before, you can apply to attend less than 4 days per week in exceptional circumstances, and I'll leave it to Kim and Luke to tell you more about what you have to do to apply for that, because I have no idea. Do you want to talk about that now?
Yeah, just email.
Okay, so send an email to SW Placements if you need to do less than 4 days per week. And yeah, that's all good. Next one, Kim? Akash.
I just wanted to understand in terms of attendance,
Yeah.
how is that managed? Like, is there a system like we have punch in and punch out? How is that done? Is it based on the organization or do we have our own system?
Yeah, good question. So you have a timesheet. We give you the template at the beginning of the semester, and you complete a timesheet every day or week, showing how many hours you've done on each day that week and what activities you've been doing. And then your agency supervisor signs your timesheet. And you can count also topic-related activities like integration seminars, which are part of all of the field education topics, up to a maximum of 14 hours. And you'll find out more about that closer to the actual start of the topic. Okay, so I'll just very briefly talk about the impact of COVID on the pandemic, the impact of the COVID pandemic on placements. It is reducing for obvious reasons because of the way things are changing in how the government is managing the pandemic. But we do still find that there are times when students, agencies go into lockdown, they might not temporarily be able to attend placement. So at the moment, we do have a system for managing work from home activities. We've got a policy and there's a plan that you need to complete in consultation with your field education liaison person if you do have to work from home for a period. So you'll find out more about that closer to the start of your topics. And, you know, if something changes with COVID and we end up with a virulent new strain and we go back to lockdowns, we have to reconsider then what we're going to have to do about that. But we manage that. We'll find a way to manage it with as little impact on you as possible. Thanks, Kim. Topic enrollment. You have to complete all the required prerequisite topics before you can go on your first placement. After that, the only prerequisite is that you complete your first placement successfully before you can do your final placement. So you can't do both of those in the same semester. And if you fail a prerequisite topic, you have to revise your study plan through Ask Flinders because you have to postpone your placement until the following semester. Okay, and field education topic assessment. We'll go into much more detail about this at the beginning of the topic period. But essentially, field education topics are non-graded, which means you either pass or fail. You don't get a percentage grade. You have to do all of those things in order to pass a placement. So that's complete the 500 hours, complete a learning plan and other written assignments, have a weekly reflection on your learning, which you discuss with your supervisor. You have a mid and an end of placement assessment, and there's specific requirements around those. And you have to perform at the required level in each of the learning outcomes for the placement topic that you're enrolled in. And we will go into more detail about that closer to the time. So we're almost at the end for me to hand over. I always talk too much, sorry. Preparing for a placement interviews, just some tips for success. We do find sometimes that this is where people come unstuck. I can tell you some horror stories. I can also tell you some really funny stories about people who know that they screwed up in an interview. They come back to us and they're like so embarrassed because of something that they said that they knew just was not going to get them into the placement at the time. So we really encourage you to think very, very carefully about your preparation for a placement interview. Agencies do tend to treat this like a job interview, even though we think that's unfair. That's the reality that they do, because they want to make sure if they're going to have you for such a long time on placement that you're going to be a constructive member of the team, that you're going to get on with people, and that you're going to do, you know, you're there to learn, but they also, generally the agency would be expecting to get something out of it as well, in the sense that you're contributing in some meaningful way to their work. So they do all have pre-placement interviews. So we really recommend that you have a look at the resources, pre-placement interview resources on the Flow site, which Nalini is going to show you shortly. And once you've been matched to a placement, so you do all of that, you do all of that preparation, then once you've been matched to a placement, you contact the agency immediately. We had an example just this semester, didn't we, Luke and Kim, of someone who contacted the agency 5 months later, and was then shocked that the placement was no longer available. So 3 days, please, because they're not going to wait for you for 5 months. By then they've forgotten that you were even matched to that placement. And also we encourage you to follow the instructions for contacting the agency. Gather information about the agency, both from in place, where you'll have a bit of the information, but also the agency website. And there's a website called SA Community, which is really, really helpful because it lists pretty much every human service agency and community service in South Australia. And it gives you information like their opening times, what services they have, and that helps you to prepare so that you know what the service is about before you go for your interview. Getting directions, information about transport. So first of all, so that you pitch up on time for the placement interview, but then also so that you can work out how you're going to get there regularly once you hopefully are accepted on placement. And the vast majority of students do get accepted following the placement interview. If you don't panic. Contact Luke and Kim, and they will then follow up with you. But I also just want to say one other really, really important take-home message regarding the placement interview is having an open attitude to learning is really, really in your interests. It's not nice to be turned down for a placement because it then creates stress at a late stage in the process. You have to wait to be rematched to another agency if there's one available. Obviously that adds stress to your situation. And there are sometimes things that happen, like a supervisor will become ill, the placement will be withdrawn, and that's none of your fault, and we will work with that. But it is really important that you present your best self at the placement interview, that your attitude that you're presenting when you do the interview is enthusiastic, and that you give the impression that you're going to be engaged in the learning opportunities that the agency is going to provide. And if they ask you trick questions like, what is your, where do you want to work in the future? We hate it when agencies ask that because we actually think that's a really unfair question, because you don't have to want to work in this particular area in order for you to have a successful placement there. But some agencies will ask you that. So think carefully about how you answer that, honestly, but without giving the agency the impression that you're not interested in what they have to offer. So I'll leave that with you to look at the resources.
Points there, Janine.
Yeah.
I just want to give a few tips as well to add to that because we have had lots of meetings in past semesters with students who may not have succeeded and have come in and said, I know I stuffed up technically. Yeah. So some of the things would be, not to, if they ask you, why do you want to have a placement setting here, to not say things as directly as, well, it wasn't actually my preference. Will team told me to come here. Okay, so that kind of thing is just a big turn-off. If you were a supervisor in an agency and you had a student come in, look at it from their perspective, they think this person has zero interest in being here. We're not interested in having this student for 500 hours when they're not showing an interest in the organisation. And also, if you're asked questions where you don't actually know the answer, instead of saying, I don't know the answer to that, a better way of responding, depending on what the question is, would be to just say, look, in a similar situation I've been in, I would probably look at it from this angle, but I'm really receptive to learning and shadowing and observing how you do it here in the organisation. It's called a reframe. Yeah. Instead of just saying, I don't know, and having your arms folded with that really closed off body language that just is not open. So they look at this body language, they're looking at how you're responding and talking, And I just wanted to add a few more tips, not to make you anxious about it. You're not going for a job interview. It is about learning. It's not a recruitment drive for the agency, but we know that students can sometimes feel like that in a bit of an interview situation. So it's good to just have some prompts yourself to shut down, and people here would be familiar with closed and open sort of responses to things. So to shut down and say, you know, I don't know, or I'm not interested, those kind of things they'll be perceiving as disinterest. And obviously there are a lot of students to place, so it's really important for us that, you know, you're putting your best foot forward as well and doing your best to try to move forward with a positive interview. Technically it is an interview, but yeah, you're not there to be hired. Just some tips. Does anyone have any questions about that of either Janine or I? Because it is a space where students can get a bit nervous. Anything that you want any tips on around that? Yeah.
Can I assume the placement interview is via video, or are there instances where students go into the agency and meet face-to-face?
Almost always at the agency.
At the agency.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Very few of them will do it online.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And also, say a student is unsuccessful, is there an avenue where the student can be provided feedback?
Yes.
Post, okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
where's
so
that
we
from
have
then?
someone who works with us and actually does debriefings with students who've been turned down at interviews. Yeah.
So is that the same for rural places too?
Yes. Yeah.
So we have to travel there for interview.
Oh no. Oh, thank you. I get your question, Luke. Good question.
Good question. No, so a lot of our rural placements are with larger, more overarching organisations. For example, Department for Child Protection, SA Health, and obviously working in a rural area, they have a bit more flexibility with doing an interview perhaps online because, yeah, we can't expect you to drive to Cooper Pedy for a 15-minute conversation and then drive back. So, yeah.
Yeah,
Don't
thank
stress
you.
about that.
Thanks. Okay, let's... Oh, sorry, Akash.
So I just wanted to understand when we go for the interview or the organization, do they have any English language requirements, anything of that sort when we are going for the interview?
Not explicitly, not English language per se, but it's more around communication and interpersonal skills. So, you know, people can have some difficulties with English, which is understandable for many students or international students. But the main thing is that you're able to communicate effectively. So, you know, how do you find ways around those barriers? How do you present yourself as confident, as warm, as engaging? You know, not just giving yes or no answers, sitting with your eyes down the whole time. Yeah, so it's more about how you're using your interpersonal and communication skills, and you're not going to have to worry. Yeah.
On the other side of that as well, a lot of our placements will ask for students who are bilingual or have experience in certain cultures and that sort of thing. So I know a lot of students will let us know that as part of their pre-placement process with us with the information on placement, on in-place. But yeah, if you can remember to mention that as well, that's really helpful because yeah, there's probably 15 to 20 placements a semester which are only for bilingual students and only within certain cultural contexts. So that's everything from students who are Islamic through to students who speak a range of Indian languages or Chinese and that kind of thing. So it is an asset as well, so don't forget that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for rural placement, so as international students, we're not supposed to do all our courses online. So I was just wondering, like, how it works traveling.
Okay, that's a great question because up until this semester, we actually had a couple of students. One was in Perth and one was in Whyalla, who were having to travel here for their seminars because international students, because they'd maxed out their online enrollments in topics. But now the university has 3 different enrollment options, and placement is called in-person enrollment, even if you're in Perth or Whyalla or wherever, it's still called in person, which means as an international student, you can do a rural remote placement and you can do your seminars online, both in the bachelor's and the master's topics, which is great because it gives you that option, which was very difficult for international students before. Okay, I better wrap up. Our WHEEL support team are going to tell you more about pre-placement requirements and timelines. So I think we'll stop there and hand over to the WHEEL team, and then we'll open it to general questions after that, if that's okay. So Nalini and Kim and Luke. Yes.
Do you guys want to go get a drink? Maybe stand up a little bit, move around. It's been a little bit of time. Or happy to just get going? Get going? Cool. All right. So as Janine mentioned, I'm Luke. Kim is standing over on the corner pressing the buttons. If you want to go back one slide quickly, Kim. We're going to cover a few bits and pieces here just about the pre-placement process for this specific semester. So for students going on placement in semester 1, 2023. This session may be familiar to some of you. I can see some faces that I've seen before. So we did this session on the 4th of October over in Social Sciences North. It's also online on our Flow site, so you can go and have a look at the full session proper if you would like to as well, following this today. So I'm going to touch on a couple of the key aspects to the pre-placement process. The process is the same each semester. The dates specifically relate to students going on semester 1 placement in 2023. So if you're going later on and you're just here to take in some of the information, the process will apply, but the dates will be slightly different. So we're going to have a look at the different things you have to do and the different systems you'll be involved in using. So those are like in place. We also have to fill out a survey at one point, but we'll just go through them as we go through things. So our key dates for this semester, now you'll notice a few of these have already passed. So we're right in the midst of things at the moment. There was a survey that went out to all of our social work students early in September, which is basically to say, hey, placement's coming up for semester 1. Would you like to do a placement? And if you're doing a placement, are you going to be doing a first or a final placement? And are you going to be doing a placement interstate? There's also a chance for you to say that you're an international student and you're currently offshore. And so we know, because there are some things around interviews where we need to sort of know where you are and if you can be in the country for a certain date to do your interview. We are currently here, so we've just started matching as of yesterday. I've had my head deep in an Excel spreadsheet all morning, so I know everything about everyone at the moment. It's very confusing. We compare all of the information that we get through these processes, and then we start putting them together with offers from agencies, which has also been sort of happening in the background here. We have different things here that are, I would say, are more important than others. So I'd like you all to remember December the 1st, please, because that's your compulsory compliance deadline. That's, along with the day you start your placement, probably the most important date of this whole process. So that's December the 1st. That's where all of your compulsory compliance, which is your working with children check, aged care, sector check, your police check, your COVID vaccination certificate, and your safe environments check for SA-based students is all due that day. They're the 5 things that are due that day. Nothing else, nothing more, nothing less, just that on December the 1st. So if you have any questions about that, click on the compliance link in the email signature you get from the WHEEL support team. All the information is there and it's all on the Flinders website. If you want to go to the next one, actually go back one, I missed one thing. So placement interviews, as Janine was talking about, these happen for semester 1 placement over 2 blocks. So you may have an interview that falls outside of these dates, and that will be depending on the agency that you're matched with. Typically speaking, most agencies will interview you within a couple of weeks of you contacting them. So you'll be matched with our first lot of matches going out on December the 1st, once you're fully compliant. And you'll be able to contact the agency, like Janine said, within 3 days. And then you can arrange an interview. It might be 3 days after you get matched. It might be a week later. It will depend on when they're available to do it. Again, you've sort of got to work with them on this. You might have some commitments. You might have some classes on, or you might have work, for example. If you just communicate this with them and be upfront about it, they'll often work with you. It's not a case of you have to be there at a certain date or you can't do the placement. They will be flexible. As we move towards Christmas, though, a lot of these agencies will have people go on leave, obviously to go back and spend time with their families. Likewise, students are probably going to be with their families, whether that be in Australia or overseas. So we have a sort of a gap here between December the 16th and January the 9th, where we don't expect interviews to happen. If your host agency has asked you to attend an interview in this time, and you're in Adelaide and you can do it, that's completely fine. However, we will be letting agencies know that we don't expect students to be able to interview between those dates. Once we get back from the Christmas period, we head to the 9th of January, we'd expect students to be available for interviews in that time frame if they haven't already done one, because we start to sort of get into crunch time for placements, with the January the 31st being obviously the first date students can start. We don't want to be having students go out to interview in that last week if we can help it, because often there's a lot more things going on, like if students potentially are being rematched because their placement has fallen through. There's quite a bit happening for our team in that period. So however many we can get done as early as possible, the best. That's sort of our end goal, I guess. If you can't be available between the 1st of December and the 16th of December, let's say you're currently overseas because you've had to go home for whatever reason, or there's students this semester who are going on a study exchange in New Zealand. So they can't be here for that date. They've let us know, and that's completely fine. We're going to work around that and work with them to try and make sure they can get a placement interview done as early as possible. We're planning on sending out a placement match this afternoon for a student because they're away for the whole month of November all the way through to January. So all you have to do is be upfront with us and tell us when you are and aren't available for your interview. And generally speaking, we will be able to work things around to make sure that you can still get your interview done with enough lead time into your placement that you can relax and prepare for it adequately. Next one, please, Kim. So the nomination for placement survey, that happened through the month of September. We sent this to, I think, about 950 students directly, as well as posting it to the Social Work Flow site. So thousands of students would have seen this. We had about 450 people respond. Of that 450, there's about in the high 300s roughly were eligible and now have been included in the enrolment process going forward. If you believe you're eligible for a placement, one of the placement topics in semester 1, and you didn't fill that survey in, please email SW Placements. We'll just double check that you can do placement with the enrolment team, and we'll get you involved in the process as quick as we can. If you miss this date, it's not the end of the world. Just simply let us know. We obviously would like everyone to be in and doing things by the end of this date, but we understand sometimes life gets in the way. There are circumstances that you can't help, and we'll work with you again to get you on placement for the semester. We won't go through in place in detail today, just because it's a bit finicky with our setup, and it does take a little bit of time. But the recording that we did of this session on the 4th has a step-by-step guide of in place, where you have to go, what it is, even how it looks, and how it feels as a student to go through and fill in the information we need on it. So if you go and have a look at that video on the Flow site, then you'll be able to get a step-by-step guide. It goes for about 10 minutes, the in-place section. If you do get stuck though, please, again, email us. We're always here to chat and help you through whatever you're stuck with. If you go to the next section, Kimbo, what we need for you on in place each semester for our matching processes is this student information for placement. Now, there are more categories than what are just here. These are sort of summaries of what the information entails. Most crucially, it's do you or do you not have a driver's license? You do not need a driver's license to do a placement. If you do have a driver's license though, that's a great help, because it means you can access more placements, because some placements require students to have driver's licenses. Additionally as well, if you have access to a car, sort of means you can obviously go further to get to your placement. Example of this would be somewhere like the Adelaide Hills, where it's not a rural placement, but it's really hard to get public transport to a placement at, say, the Adelaide Hills Community Centre. If you can drive though and you live 10 minutes away, perfect, you're a great candidate for that placement. We also ask if you've got any work experience or any previous study that may be related to a social work placement. So quite a few of our master's students, obviously, you've all studied before. What your undergraduate degree is really helpful, because we can better place you in an agency that might have similar requirements, for example. I know we've got some students who have done some really great project work on placements who had maybe a business administration background and are more familiar with that context, or at least that type of work, maybe not in a social work context. And likewise, we've had some students who maybe have a psychology background and can go into a mental health related placement slightly more prepared than other students might. So it just helps to sort of split the difference between maybe a couple of placements we might have available for you as a student, and it really helps. Likewise, the placement areas of interest do the same thing. So there's about 15, I think. We're looking to narrow that down because obviously 15 is a lot of options. We ask for 3 of those from each of you. Previously, this was only available to final placement students, but now first placement students can also do it, which is great. It basically means that if we have 2 placements sitting there, they both look very similar for you as a student. One of them is with child protection and one of them is with mental health, and you've indicated you want to do placement with children and families, child protection or education. We'll be able to hopefully match you to the child protection placement, which will be more to your interests, and as Rebecca was touching on in the interview, it sort of helps, I guess, you be a bit more open to what's there, particularly if it's your first placement, because you might not be completely familiar with exactly how you fit into the setting as a social worker, and yeah, I guess where your interests might take you. A lot of students will indicate, 2 areas of interest that are very similar. For example, children and families and child protection. That doesn't mean that you're more likely to get placed within a specific area. It just sort of narrows the focus that we can look for you. They aren't guarantees though. Wish we could guarantee it, but at the moment we have about 260 placement offers. We have 360 students. So obviously not everything lines up perfectly. And any other things that you might have that are extraordinary circumstances. So access plans are sort of different. We'll touch on those a little bit later. But if you, for example, have some young children and you need to care for your children and you need to be, for example, placed close to where they go to school or close to where you live so you can coordinate your day and the logistics of school drop-off and pick-up and everything like that, just simply put it in the exceptional circumstances and let us know. There's two areas for this. Exceptional circumstances we'd like to keep for things that are exceptional, so things that will affect the logistics of your placement. Things like looking after children or perhaps caring for a family member. There's also a section at the bottom which is additional information. This section is sort of more for if you have, let's say, a job history working with child protection. You say, I specifically do not want to work with child protection. I've been there for 10 years. I would appreciate a learning opportunity outside of this scope or outside of that context. It's a bit of an open area for you to put any information in. If you write an essay, look, I'm probably not going to read the full essay. You need to keep it summarised, like it's dot pointed if you can. I obviously can't read through 1,000 words from 400 students a semester and then get it right. So keep it as short as you can. And applications for work-based interstate and rural placements, these have now closed because we are past the deadline for that. If you're an interstate student or a student who you think you can do a work-based placement, as Janine outlined earlier, or you are keen on doing a rural placement, please just get in contact with us and we'll walk you through the steps you need to go through now because it's slightly different to how it was at the time that this was presented. So, Kimbo. So this is at its core what matching is. So obviously student here on the left, placement on the right. Lots of things here match up. So is the address of the placement agency close to your home address? Is your experience matching up with maybe some other factors of the other placement? Say they want someone who's got a psychology background or a background in business administration, like I mentioned earlier. Do you have areas of interest that match up to the placement? It's all pretty straightforward when it's one-to-one. Kimbo, if you can, this is what it sort of looks like in my head at the moment. So there's 400 of you over here and there's 400 placements over there, and we have to work out with those bits of information that you just gave on in place where these best fit in together. Obviously, this is not going to be perfect. You might want to do a child protection placement, like I said earlier, not get a child protection placement and be disappointed. Unfortunately, the biggest hurdle we have is location of placements and location of students. A lot of placements in social work are at the north end of the city and the south end of the city, and a lot of our students live in the middle of the city. So there's a bit of travel that happens. If you live in, say, Elizabeth, there are probably going to be social work opportunities close to you and around you. They're going to be in areas that are pretty typical of the area. Likewise, the closer you go to the southern suburbs, the same thing happens again. The placement opportunities are reflected by the type of services in the area, and the services in the area are reflected by the populations in it. So you sort of got to be aware of, I guess, where you live, what is around you, where your placements might be because of that. We try not to have students travel too far. So we like to keep everyone going between 15 and 40 minutes. The burden of travel is expected to be shared by the whole cohort. So if you live next door to a community centre, there's a really high likelihood you're not going to be placed there, because if you get placed there, someone else might have to travel 50 minutes to go past where you live to get to somewhere else. So we like to keep all of our travel uniform across the cohort between around 15 to 40 minutes. Per the rules, you can go 2 hours away, but we won't do that to you. Public transport as well is a limiting factor. So a lot of our placements at, say, schools, for example, are really well resourced by public transport. And then the example I used earlier of, say, the Adelaide Hills Community Centre, there's not a lot of buses that go up to Bel Air. So it's all about just being aware of the interests you have, where you live, how you can get to your placement. These all are part of this big puzzle before we even get into, does the agency want a first placement student, a final placement student, someone with a car, someone who's bilingual. So there's all sorts of things going on. We do our best to get everyone where they want to go. So if we don't get you where you want to go, we did try our best. We just ask you to be patient. You do get 2 placements. It shouldn't happen twice. So yeah. Guess?
Sorry, just
Oh, you got a microphone if you'd like. There you go. You can. We're recording, so then everyone else can hear it.
Okay, I'm just having a small question regarding to the working time, because
Yes.
there are different organizations, such as school has a earlier time than the others, and then maybe others get 9 to 5. So what's the general, like, will that affect some of us if we have a part-time job at night or something?
Yeah.
Or are they all restrained within maybe 7 to 5?
Good question. We have on the other end of things, so like the more extreme examples of ours, so like shift work, we have placements in hospitals, we have placements at drop-in centres. So, you know, it's really hard to do a placement in those settings without being involved in out-of-hours work. If we think that a student is suitable to a placement there, we'll double check with them. Hey, are you able to do work out of hours, like out of the traditional 9 to 5 kind of hours, just to make sure that that's suitable. We obviously would have a look at the student's exceptional circumstances before we did that. So if a student says, I've got 3 young children who I need to do school drop-off for, we're not going to place them at an overnight shelter for domestic violence, because it'd be very hard for them to fit that in with the rest of their life. Likewise, if, school placement, for example, where it's placement might be 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock, we have to bear that in mind, how that affects your hours down the line as well, because that's obviously not the full 7 hours for the day. So we just have to keep in mind who we place in those settings as well. So yeah, to answer your question, it varies depending on where you're placed. Generally speaking though, the majority of our offers are 9 to 5 or school hours, 8 till 4. The exceptional ones we will double check first. So we check on the outliers. Any other questions on matching specifically before we move on?
Janine was talking about like the different criteria and conditions that we have to meet to, for the placements. So how much of that is our responsibility and how much of that is the WIL team's responsibility? And if it's ours, like at what point do we have to check that? Is it during the interview or is it before that?
Do you mean in regards to like the information that you provided earlier about how we match you to a placement, or more the information that you're provided about the agency itself?
The agency itself, like for example, having a qualified social worker and things like that.
So that's one of the first questions we ask agencies, is if they have a qualified social worker or not. And then it's one of the main factors, or possibly the most important factor in where we match final placement students, is have they had supervision or not? And then if they haven't, then obviously they need it. In terms of the information about the agency itself, each placement on InPlace has a little blurb for the placement description, and that's provided directly from the agency. So some agencies will have really long slabs of information that are basically role descriptions, as if you were applying for a job. Some of them will say, student will be working with the community engagement team. So you sort of have to try and make of that what you will. I would suggest that you have a look on their website, have a look on their social media as well. That's a great place to learn more about what they're currently doing and gives you things to talk about in your interview. And also maybe if you can ask some of your classmates if they know about anything to do with the agency. And Janine provided a really good resource before, the SA Communities website. That's really good to find out the bare basics about an organisation as well. I just say, if you think you have over-prepared for an interview, you've not over-prepared, you can prepare more. It's just, the more you know, the better. You don't want to have a question that takes you off guard, basically. No more matching related things? Yes? Microphone.
The interviews will be taking place at the organization, right? Not at the university?
Yes. So the 99% of interviews will be in person. It's generally speaking a requirement. If there are other exceptional circumstances around that, then they might be online. But I would say you would have to assume they're going to be in person at the agency.
And how many interviews you think we would be going? Like
I hope one.
one
yeah.
or a maximum of like?
So if you go to one interview and it's unsuccessful, we'll match you again. You go to another interview, and then if that's unsuccessful, we'll match you again.
So we go to one interview at a time?
Yes.
Or
Yep.
it's not like
It's
we
only
have a
one.
choice?
And they're not competitive. So it's not you versus 4 students or
Yeah.
you versus another student from another uni. It's just you match to that placement.
Okay, and 14 October was the last day to update the system. I think I can do a little bit more updation. Do you think
That's
I can
fine.
still do that?
Yep. And if you do update more on it, simply email the SW
Sure.
placements email just to let us know, and we can include that in our information for matching.
Awesome, thank you.
I have done the Metropolitan, I've selected on 14th. So can I change it now to rural placement?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much.
Just let me know. Email me. No more matching questions. All right. Next one, Kimbo. This is compliance. So this is what's due on the 1st of December. So every single person who does placement has to submit their nationally coordinated criminal history check, and it has to say, unsupervised contact with vulnerable groups. It can't say supervised contact. It can't say nothing. It has to say unsupervised contact with vulnerable groups. We have a number of links to websites that will provide you with the correct criminal history check. If, for example, you are coming from overseas and you've been in the country for 1 day, you still need a nationally coordinated criminal history check from Australia, not an international criminal history check. So head on to the social work compliance page and go down to the criminal history check, police check section, and click on the links. They are to sapolcheck.com and CV check, I think. The links to the websites are there. Just make sure you read the instructions of exactly what you need to have printed on it, because we have to turn back a lot of them. They cost like $60 each. I don't want to be turning them down if I don't have to. So please, unsupervised contact with vulnerable groups. If you're vaccinated against COVID-19, there's a section to upload that. If you're not vaccinated against COVID-19, that's fine. We can usually work with it. We will not make you get vaccinated for your placement. If you choose you are not going to get vaccinated, we can't force you to do it. That's fine. Just let us know. Don't shock us by going to placement and going to your interview, and then they say, hey, where's your COVID-19 vaccination certificate? And you say, oh, I don't have one. Not vaccinated. So we just need to know ahead of time. There are a handful of agencies that will work with us on that, and you'll still be able to go on placement as every other student does. We might just have to wear a mask occasionally, that's all. But just let us know. Yes?
For that one, I think some of the classmates has discussed it before, but I can't, because I have been vaccinated overseas, but I got like a bilingual certificate. Do I need to have the Australian one?
Nope, that one's fine. So if you present us with the one you've got to get in the country, that's perfectly fine. So
Yeah, that's the one I bring to the custom.
that's fine. Yep, that's all good.
Okay.
Yep.
As long as it's bilingual?
Yeah, as long as we can read it and we know what's on it. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
And B3, the third one is one, right?
The question was, do we need 3 vaccinations? In some settings, yes. In some settings, no. For SA Health and a lot of the government organisations, it is 3. Some settings only ask for 2. I generally would say that if you haven't got 3, you're probably not fully vaccinated in the eyes of a social work organisation. That's not to say if you haven't had your 3rd, go and get it now. I'm not telling you to do that. But yeah, generally speaking, if you haven't got 3, they won't view it as anything more than 0. So flu shot is only for aged care and SA Health placements. So that is part of the additional compliance that we will work through later on Today, we just got the compulsory compliance, which is what everyone has to submit on December the 1st. Flu shot won't fit into that. It will be depending on where you're placed.
So if we got the shot, should we upload it on?
Yep, there's a section on In Place to upload it if you have had it. So yeah, you can just chuck it up there where you need to. The additional compliance down here is for the difference between a South Australian placement and an interstate placement. Now, interstate placements, basically all that you need, apart from the criminal history check and the COVID-19 certificate, is your state's working with children equivalent. So, for example, in Queensland, that's a blue card. We need either a photo of the blue card where you can clearly see its expiry date, or the email certificate you get which states that you have the certificate and the blue card, and the date that it expires. We obviously see that it's yours and has your name on it as well. We also require the state-based mandatory reporting training from each state if the placement requires it. So all of these things are the university's requirements. Placements have additional ones on top of that sometimes. NDIS workers check is a common one. Flu vaccination, as we've just talked about. Immunisation compliance for SA Health. They're all placement specific. We will tell you exactly what you have to get when you match to each of your placements. South Australian students need to have the DHS Working with Children check and the DHS Aged Care Sector screening. I would say if you're going on placement in semester 1, I've already emailed all of you about that 3 times. So we initiated the DHS checks on students' behalf. They got an email from DHS to say, hey, you've got these 3 checks. The third one is the vulnerable persons screening. Now that's no longer a compulsory requirement of the university, but a number of our providers will ask for that check. So they cost the exact same amount to get all 3 as it does just to get 1. So it is best to get all 3. It's the cost of your application that you're paying for, not the cost of the 3 checks. It's kind of hard to explain that in any other way. But a common question is, yeah, I've already got a Working with Children check. Do I have to pay $60 still? Yes, it's the cost of your application, not the 3 specific checks. So if you're just getting aged care, it's still $60. So get all 3 if you can. Yeah,
is
Lucas.
there a excuse me? Is there government assistance or any government area that we can access to help towards funding this? All the different
Towards
checks?
funding it, not that I'm aware of. If you are in a particular situation where you're strained financially, I'd say speak to the Student Association, the overarching Flinders University Student Association, to see what assistance might be available to you individually. But yeah, they're expensive. I get that. At the moment, we can't do anything about that. I wish we could. But yeah, there's nothing directly available that I can give you to say, yep, go speak to these people. Yeah, it ends up being about roughly $150 for all of these if you get all of them. So I would just say make sure that the ones you've got now are still valid if you can. The Safe Environments training is a in-person training that is run by a government organisation here through a range of facilities. So some schools run them, some community centres run them, sometimes DHS themselves will run them. They're all run through different providers at different locations, so you can go in person, do the training. It varies how long it is, it's between about 3 to 5 hours roughly. And once you've done it once, you can just do a refresher course the next time. And if you work as a social worker in anything to do with children and families, you're likely going to need this in your workplace. So you can just refresh it the next time you go and do it, and you shouldn't have any problems. All of these things here, with the exception of the Working with Children check, are due for 3 years. So if you are going on your second placement and you did your placement in the first semester last year, it's very likely that your checks are still valid and you will not need to get new ones. So for semester 1, 2023, if your check is valid beyond June the 30th, 2023, which is when we expect placement to finish and be done by, then it will be all good. If your placement is going to go longer, for example, you're doing a 3-day-a-week placement, we need your check to be valid through the entire length of your placement. So a good guide date is the 30th of June. If you think you're doing a 3-day-a-week placement or it's going to go longer, the check needs to reflect that. The DHS Working with Children check, they will not let you get a new one unless it's less than 6 months until your current one expires. So just bear that in mind and communicate that with the Work-Integrated Learning Support team if you think that you're not going to have a check in time for your placement because the expiry dates are all jumbled up and a bit confusing. So anything to do with compliance, especially when it comes to paying for things, please ask us before you click submit, because I'd hate for it to be a waste of money and a waste of time for everyone. Just come and ask us. We're happy to answer the phone or answer an email. Kimbo. Before I go on to this stuff, any questions about compliance?
I had a question.
Yes.
I didn't get you. So all these verifications are valid for how long?
3 years.
For 3 years.
Yeah, and the Working with Children check is 5.
And the?
Working with Children check goes for 5 years. Yeah, it's a bit longer.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. So most students will only need one set of compliance for their study if they're studying full time. Part-time study can mess with that though. So yeah, we just got to make sure you check the compliance items expiry date before you go paying for a new one, because it's silly to waste money.
And the last training, we should look out for a school or somewhere that we can get the training, and we should go and attend that and then get a certificate in.
Yeah, so the Safe Environments, they have a website you can go to. So on the compliance website, in our email signature, there's a link to the portal, which has a range of providers that do it. And when they are, if there's space, all that sort of thing, you can go on and basically pick where you want to do it.
And does that also cost something?
I'm pretty sure it does. I think it's about $25 or $30 from memory. I'm not entirely sure of the price now. But the other thing with that is right now, there's not a lot of education students doing that training. A lot of them will do that training though. So the earlier you can do that and the quicker you can get it out of the way and done, the better, because more and more people try to do it the closer we get to semester, and you can't start placement without it.
And how long is that valid for, that training?
3 years.
Okay, that's
Yep.
great. Thank you.
There are additional compliance items, like I said, for different placement types. So SA Health has a huge list of compliance items you have to do. Those compliance items won't be due until your placement starts, but obviously we don't want you doing it the day before in case you, I don't know, end up getting caught in traffic and can't get to your appointment. That's all right.
So if I wanted to get placed in SA Health,
Yep.
would my chance increase if I did the trainings and uploaded them more? No, right?
No,
Okay.
no. You'll have enough time between when we match students to SA Health.
So you give us that much time for
Yep.
us before we start placement, we complete those trainings.
Yeah, so SA, roughly, just as a guide, SA Health placements, students will know by the end of November, and then the placement doesn't start until obviously February. The interviews, I think, are still in November as well. And then you'll have like 2.5 months to get your compliance all sorted. Now, SA Health requires sometimes, you might have to get a Hep B vaccination, you might have to go and do a CPR training course, get a tuberculosis screening. There's all sorts of things involved in it. So we give you quite a long time to do that stuff. The majority of placements only require the basic stuff that we went through just before. That's the vast majority are covered by that. There's a question on in place in the student information for placement, just to say, yeah, I'm happy to do the SA Health compliance if I match there. Before you say yes to that, just go and have a look at the compliance page and have a read through of what it is, because if we match to SA Health and you get a great placement opportunity and then you don't want to get a flu vaccination, or you say you're allergic to the flu vaccination, you can't get it, then that's obviously a bit of a bummer for you. So the special information session we did for rural, work-based and interstate placements was last week. Any questions about any of these things now, just come straight to us. The deadline, like I said earlier, has passed to apply for them, but if you didn't know anything else about it and you didn't think maybe that you'd be interested in it and you now are, that's great. Just come and talk to us, particularly about work-based placements, because Janine went through quite a good amount of information before, which you now may be more aware of what you can do. And work-based placements are awesome opportunities. It means you can do the placement without the financial burden of doing a placement ordinarily. And also rural placements, we're always looking for more students to go rurally. Domestic students, there's quite an array of scholarship opportunities available there. International students, we have great communities like Janine said in Whyalla, Port Augusta as well. Students that have gone through placement now work in the area. Some of them are supervising placements of students now. It's a great little ecosystem of things. And yeah, it's just a really cool thing to do. You see way more on a rural placement just by the fact that there might be 3 allied health providers in a town or a region versus in Adelaide where there's 3 on every street corner. So you see a wide range of things. And we'd always encourage students to go rural if you can, because yeah, the experience is pretty much unmatched in terms of what you're going to see in placement, but also it's just a life experience. It's a really different experience than living in town. As someone who's lived in a rural area, it's very, very different. Access plans, Janine touched on and went through the details of that. So as part of the matching process, the topic coordinators will let us know if there are requirements that need to be changed for your placement. So say if you need to do a placement 3 days a week, that's fine. We don't know why. I don't know why that is. I don't know any of the other details around that other than if it's a simple thing like 3 days a week, I just get told that. And then I work with that. If you have a requirement for your placement to be changed, the topic coordinator will talk to the host agency about that, and I won't know about it. So you don't need to worry about anything getting shared or breaching the confidentiality of the conversations you've had with your topic coordinator. If you potentially have, say, a disability or something like that where the placement might need specific negotiations for it, and you're happy for those conversations to be had on your behalf by me with the agency, that's fine. We just need your permission for that. More often than not, though, your topic coordinator will be having those conversations with the individual placement host. And they're obviously confidential conversations. They're very sensitive information. It's not recorded anywhere. It's purely, it's a phone call. Hey, this is a situation. Can we work this out? And then I just get communicated the change of dates, that kind of thing. Nothing about the access plan requirements specifically. I don't know if you have anything to add on that, Janine, but that's pretty much it. Basically, you don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me. I basically don't know anything to do with it. So if you call up to say, hey, I have an access plan, and you start going and talking about it, you don't have to talk to me about it at all. Don't worry about that. Scholarships, as I mentioned before, primarily rural placements for domestic students is where there's the most available, but please go and have a look on the website below. If you just search scholarships on the university website, you can have a look. You never know what's there if you don't ask. If you can get in contact with the finance team that does it all, they might be able to help you more. If you don't ask, you don't get. So it's better to see if there's something there for free for you. Other than that, I don't really have anything else to add. If you have any questions about the work-integrated learning stuff, who's first? Yep.
I just found out the other day because we do have 2 other courses happening while we do full-time placement. So are we going to go to school to have the lectures, or are they all be organized online?
You want to take this one, Janine? Sure.
So yes, for master students, you do 2 other topics alongside your placement topic. So first placement students do the groups and communities topic and the research topic alongside first placement. The bachelor students do 1 other topic alongside their first placement, and 1 topic alongside final placement. Master students do 2 other topics alongside final placement. And you, in the masters, have classes on a Friday, and in the bachelors, your classes are on a Monday. And you can choose to enroll in the topic online if you want to do the field placement topic integration seminars online.
Okay, so we have a choice, right? Like to choice to have the class online or just go to school on Friday. Yeah. So if we go to school on Friday, are we gonna get enough of 500 hours? So, like we miss a day, so that's.
Yeah, so most students attend placement 4 days per week, not 5, because they've got classes on the other day. Yeah.
I have 2 questions. So during the placement, do we have assignment submissions?
Yes.
We do.
Yeah. Sorry.
Wow. For the 2 subjects that we're doing online, right? Great. And the second question, we had a fellow student ask this question in our previous class with Louise, where she's, we wanted to know a little bit about insurance. Let's say we went and to some place and got a dog bite or something like that. Do we need to get our personal insurance, or are we under the insurance of the organization we're working with? Just a little bit of clarity on that.
Yeah, Nalini's probably the best person to answer that one.
You're completely covered. You don't need to worry about your own insurance. We cover you. So if you're enrolled at the university, you're covered either by us or the organisation. But irrespective, don't worry about insurance. You're completely covered and we will deal with it. No, you don't have to do anything. So the university takes that insurance on your behalf. And if the organisation wants to see evidence of that insurance, we provide that. That's life, accident? That's everything that you will need while you're there, if you completely crash their computer system and destroy their whole database, there is insurance even to cover that. So you will be covered. You don't just, do not worry about any of that. I mean, obviously, if you did it intentionally, you won't be covered. But otherwise, you're entirely covered. So just do not worry about the insurance side of it at all. We completely look after all of that back end. There is an agreement between us and the organisation that covers a whole range of things that we don't go into with you directly because they're between us and the host. But we ensure that you're safe, that you're covered, and if anything occurs, you just need to know, let your direct supervisor at the university know, and they will help guide you through whatever needs to happen. If there's an incident, that's fine. We record it, we look after you. We're there for you. Beautiful.
And if your host organisation does maybe ask you if you have any of the university's insurance information, direct them to us and we can help you out answer that question.
I had a couple of questions from students that sent through to me.
Certainly.
One's an online student in the Riverland, and they've asked, they wanted to ask whether or not they could source placement themselves.
So yes and no. So if you're in the Adelaide metropolitan area, you absolutely cannot source your own placement. I stress you absolutely cannot do it. There's a lot of delicate relationships in the metropolitan area that are between us, UniSA, placement providers. Once you get out of the metropolitan area and you get out past Gawler, past Murray Bridge, down past Victor Harbour, completely happy for you to do that. So long as you're part of the rural placement process and you've said, yes, you want to do a rural placement rurally, and then you communicate to us to let you know, I'm talking to Headspace in Berry and they're keen to have me on placement. Is there any information that I need to give them? Or are you able to speak to them to talk about my placement? So long as you include us in that process, completely fine. If you just go and talk to someone, organise a placement and start doing it, then that won't work. So long as you can include us in the process so we can make sure everything's ticked off along the way and it's been assessed by a social work academic and everything is ticked off from a logistical and a accreditation requirement, then it's all good. So rurally, yes. Metropolitan, no. Make sure that you talk to us if it is rural though, because there are some little bits we have to do and tick off.
And the other question from a student was, I know we've been talking about semester one, but she's received RPL for first placement and she's now thinking about second placement, and she wanted to know the guidelines around this and who is the best person to talk to.
Firstly, congratulations. Secondly, the WIL team, the WIL support team, that's who you would talk to. So we just have to make sure that the second placement is different to the experience from the recognition of prior learning. So just as if the student had gone on placement in the setting that they get the RPL for, we have to think about that when it comes to matching again. So if it's because they've worked in child protection for 10 years, they can't do a child protection placement second time around. That there's plenty of space and room to fill that information in when submitting the information on in place as part of the pre-placement process. But if you as a student are just wanting to make doubly sure that we know exactly what everything's about, just let us know that of your situation. You've got an RPL for your first placement, you're going into your final placement. Janine has a very well manicured document of RPL applications, if they're approved, what they're for, and we can go and have a look at your RPL application and double check that there's nothing that clashes, but also to make sure that you're getting as wide a range of an experience as possible for your second placement, and that it's supervised. It does have to be supervised. Any other questions? That's great. Means you've answered everything. Never mind.
Hello. Earlier you mentioned about the information of the agencies in place, is it? I couldn't find it. Is it not available yet?
Yeah, so we'll be able to show you. But yeah, it's in the place. Once you're matched, goes into the placement, you can click on it and then it has some information there as well.
Okay, so once matched. So you mean that we will only see the information of the agency that we got matched?
Correct. So right now, for example, there's a couple of students who we've already matched and it's sitting there. If I click a button, you'll suddenly see it. You won't see it until I click that button. And once I click that button, you'll know about it. So
Okay,
yeah,
because I
it's,
thought it would be kind of like, you know, very interesting learning to, you know, kind
It
of
is, it's a
like
surprise.
You could see all the information of the agencies that, you know,
Yep.
even though you are not matched with them. So
Yep.
it's kind yeah.
oh yeah. It is. It's a bit of. It does. It probably will feel like a bit of a lottery when the placements start coming out, and also they won't all come out at the exact same time. So we might release all of the school placements on December the 1st, and we might release all the SA Health placements a little bit earlier because they sort of do their own thing in a way because of the compliance. It's important to remember that you are in the process. You are getting a placement matched to you. We might have had your placement matched to you months ago. Just because you don't know about it yet, there's probably a reason for it. It might be your compliance. It might be because we have 4 students going to one location and one of those students is not compliant and we want to send all 4 together. Because if you, let's say your Working with Children check was delayed and you missed the deadline and you let us know and it was all fine, if we sent you as a group of 4 to an agency and then we said, oh, there's 4 students, but one person forgot to submit their thing at the right time, so they haven't been sent their placement yet, so they won't hear from you. That's obviously not going to look good for the student who has missed the deadline, even if it's not their fault. So we wait until all of the students for each agency are matched and then we send them. So, you know, you'll get your placement with enough time to do your interview and everything. Just ask us if you're being included in the placement process, if you're unsure, and we'll tell you yes you are, yes you're not. Yes you are or no you're not. And if you should be there, we'll get you in and we'll get you sorted. But don't stress if you don't get it on the 1st of December. The placements are coming. We just can't do 400 in one day. Our emails would blow up. All right, now Lenny wants to go through the flow site. So this is a brand new product for all of our students in the College of Education, Psychology and Social Work. Previously, we had all of our own discipline-specific pages or related to topics. This brings all of them together, but Nalini will go through it in more detail. So all yours.
With bated breath, I wait for it to recognise that I've just plugged in my laptop.
Introduce Louise Butler, who is, she was teaching earlier, I told you, and I think most of you know her, but Louise is the topic coordinator now for first placement in first semester. Do you want to say?
Hello everyone. I should have said hello earlier when there were more people here, but I'm glad to see you all. So I'm topic coordinator for first placement next year, so you will be seeing a fair bit of me. Once you get your placement, and next year the flow site for first placement will open and I'll have information on that. And so for the topic, field education, first placement, it's separate to what we'll do. They do all the preparing and matching you to placements, but we do the types of things that Will talked about, making sure that your particular arrangements are considered. It's us and sometimes me or Janine that will be having conversations with you about additional requirements or things that are in, for example, a disability access plan or RPL, things like that we deal with. But mostly you get to know us once you start placement, and we organise for you to have your seminars 5 times over the semester where you come together with the other students in first placement to discuss reflective practice, which we've talked about a lot in my topic, and also help you and support you through your learning in field education. There are requirements for you to do particular assignments or placement assessment forms in placement, but those things you can do in placement time. The other thing that I do is oversee and support the process once you're on placement with any concerns that might come up, your first port of call will be your field education liaison person. They will be your first person, your go-to person from the university, and they talk to me about any concerns or any things that come up, and I'm able to work through anything. So it's better for us to know what's going on for you via your field education liaison person. And you will know that early next year, who your FEL is. Around the time that you start placement, you will be told who your field education person is. And we work very closely as a team. Janine and I work very closely. We've got a really good working relationship. And I make sure, and Janine makes sure, that we're on top of all the things we need to know. We don't talk about you about things we don't need to discuss, but if we do need to discuss them, we will, and we are here to support you. And at the end of the day, it is us that makes the decision about you passing your placement. The agency make a recommendation and they contribute to the decision making, but it still is an academic topic like other academic topics, and we take more into account than just what the agency say. But we're here, you know, to make sure you will be the best social worker you will be. Sometimes we might need to say things that are challenging, like we do in all topics, and sometimes we are here to say you're doing a great job, like we do in all other topics. So I look forward to saying that to you all, and many of you I know. So I look forward to seeing you all next year.
Due to the joys of technology, I'm going to stand over here and talk to you while you look at it up here. So I do apologise. I'm flexible if nothing else. So I'm just going to feel like I'm this ethereal voice from the background. What I really want to quickly do is just show you how to get in and what to find in here. I'm not going to labour the point. If you want to come and talk to me afterwards about what you're seeing, any difficulties you're having, I'll be around for a little bit. Please come and ask me those questions. But there is now, this was the old one, social work field education. We now have this as, we've said, the university-wide one. As you come in, I just need to change myself, sorry, to student. As you come in, you'll see there's this section called discipline-specific information. In order to see the social work information and to receive announcements specific to your area only, you just need to go into that area, just the first time, and become a member of social work students. And then you'll never see that there again, and your social work area has now opened up for you. What we've got in here is some quick links. So this is where you'll be able to come and find the recordings of any sessions that we've run. I hoped to have the last session up here, but I've run out of time. I'll get that up there hopefully by the end of today. You've got a pre-placement checklist covering off on a lot of what was presented by my team today. And also you've got a pre-placement calendar that just reminds you of all of those critical dates. You can then choose the section that's relevant to you. And it just gives you specific information for your area. We also have this pre-placement guide, which just gives a bit more depth of information to what we've done today. It'll take you through the various requirements. There's some wonderful short little videos in there with the screen shown, so you can go through the process with us as we do that. And then there's been a lot of questions and a lot of discussion about interviews today, so we've got a lot of information in here about interviews. The university has a licence to a product called Big Interview. That's free for all of you to sign up to. You can go in there and there's like question roulette. You can choose to do interviews, practice interviews specific to your area of discipline. You can record yourself and watch your interviews back again. Very, very useful resource if you're a bit worried about interviews. And then we've got information about each of the different areas. So a lot of information behind those links, including all the application forms that you might need, instructions on what to do with those, information if you've got a work-based placement, information to provide to your employer, and then certainly lots and lots of introductory preparing information for those other different discipline areas. So that's just a really, really quick overview. You can obviously go in and have a look around yourself. But what we've tried to do is create a single location where you can come and find information. Oh, actually, sorry, back again. One other thing I wanted to show you. We've got, this one here, the support, where to find help. I just wanted to let you know that that was there so you can find all our different contacts. We've got our careers and employability service that you can certainly link through and contact from there. But we also have what we called USEP Career Consultant. This is a lady called Sasha. She's able to help if you have anything that fits under the definition of disability, which is incredibly broad. So that's any medical condition, it could be asthma, anything at all, any anxiety that might impact how you feel about the placement. You can register to talk to her. She's been worked in the sector for a very long time, and she'll help you prepare how to talk those conversations through. So just letting you know, we didn't cover that today, but she is also available. And that's all I wanted to do, is quickly link you through, because I think last time there was a bit of confusion on how to get in. Hopefully this is now made a little bit easier on how to get in and find the information. As always, contact us if you've got feedback, if you can't find something, if it looks wrong. More than happy to receive that feedback as well. Wonderful.
Perfect, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to, from the team at FUSWA, to thank the team at Will and the college staff for attending today and taking time out of your day to be here and provide this. Excellent. It's been a great session. I'd hopefully get some feedback online from everyone, and everyone that is online to throw through to the staff questions, or please send the questions through to us here at FUSWA. I do want to make a special acknowledgement to Keisha, who was spearheaded today and was behind the actual contact and organising meetings with these college staff, and who was kind enough to arrange some amazing little pastries that are currently waiting for everyone to get stuck into. I'd also like to acknowledge Frankie, who unfortunately isn't here today, and Akesh, who, along with myself, took time out to meet college staff with Keisha as well. So thank you, everyone, and thank you everyone that attended, and it was a great session.